Chag Sameach. Chag Sameach means happy festival, happy festival. Whereas we wish each other a peaceful Shabbat, a Shabbat Shalom, and a good New Year, a Shana Tova, and for Yom Kippur, Gemar Chatima Tova, that we should be inscribed in the Book of Life, we should finish well. On Sukkot and other festivals, we say Chag Sameach, emphasizing happiness and joy. And especially on Sukkot, which is known as Zman Simchatenu, the time of our happiness, of our joy. We might say Chag Sameach on Sukkot with even an extra gusto. After the seriousness of the month of Elul and the Yamim Noraim, the days of awe, we take a deep breath and we enter into Zman Simchatenu. Not only can we, but must we be happy on Zman Simchatenu. We are commanded in the Torah, Chag HaSukkot Ta'aseh Lecha Shivat Yamim. You should hold the festival of Sukkot for 7 days. V'samachta bechagecha. And you should be happy, you should rejoice in your festival. And then a little bit later, at the end of the next verse, V'hayita ach sameach. And you shall have nothing but joy. We are commanded to have nothing but joy. My first question for us this morning is that even possible to have nothing but joy? Is joy ever that simple? I think not usually. One of my Bible professors at the seminary introduced me to the modern folk musicians, Abigail and Sean Bengtson, a married couple whose music is not specifically Jewish, but it is very spiritual and it comes from a deep religiosity. The Bengtsons recently created a short film about their experience of getting pregnant during COVID. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about this film and want to just give a heads up that it includes discussion of pregnancy loss. The Bengtsons had lost a pregnancy years before. So when they first found out that they were pregnant, they were terrified. They were afraid to let themselves feel any joy because they knew there was a chance that it would be taken away. On top of the emotional toll of COVID, their anxiety was overwhelming, and so eventually, not really knowing what to do and how to handle all the fear and anxiety, they made a bold and, for them, truly frightening decision to be joyful about their pregnancy. Abigail sings in this short film, "I can't protect myself from grief anyway. I can't prevent something terrible from happening anyway. So I decided to just see what happened if I decided to enjoy it." And then back and forth, the two of them sang, "I'd like to be happy. I'd like to be happy. I'd like to be happy." They are not wanting to wait to be happy. And they dance around in their sweatpants in their messy COVID kitchen, and it's glorious. We really see their intense and intentional joy. Ultimately, we learn that they did lose their pregnancy, and Abigail shares that even when she first knew what was happening, she remained present and was able to feel some joy in those last moments. She says, as she looks straight into the camera and challenges us, so let's talk about joy. These are still her words. Here's what we didn't know. That joy, the joy we made, the joy we grew together, we got to keep it. We have it still. I can call on it right now. I am calling on it right now. It is heavy and sad, and it is joy. A heaviness of joy and a light kind of grief. And all of it is love. I have kept that love and now the joy, and it can't be taken away. The rabbis of the Talmud also understand, like the Bengsons, that joy is complicated, that it takes energy and focus to let ourselves fully feel joy. However, they are not as comfortable as the Bengsons with mixing joy and other emotions. For one, the rabbis were fiercely protective of the joy of the festivals. Even our mourning is cut short for the festivals. So Shiva is ended by a festival, even sometimes quite abruptly. It could be, for example, that we bury someone we love in the morning, sit Shiva for just a few hours, and then if a festival begins that evening, our Shiva is over. Our time of mourning is over. So this is a little shocking to me. According to our legal tradition, the observance of Zman Simchatenu, of our time of joy, is prioritized over fully observing Shiva, our time of grief, which we know is so important. And another example of halakha, of our Jewish law, revealing something about rabbinic conceptions of human emotion, is that weddings may not take place on Shabbat or holidays. Kiddushin, the most traditional type of marriage ceremony, is a legal transaction, and it requires signing a ketubah, so we can understand why weddings can't occur on Shabbat. And it also makes sense why they wouldn't occur on certain holidays, because we're prohibited from doing work. But we learn in the Mishnah that even during Chol HaMoed, even during the intermediate days, when we are allowed to do work, no weddings. I would think that these days would actually be perfect days to have a wedding. Why not increase the joy of Sukkot or increase the joy of Passover by having a wedding while we're already celebrating? And the Talmud, in reaction to this Mishnah, asks the same question. V'chi simcha hi lo mai have? And if it is a source of joy for them, what of it? What's the big deal? Why can't we have a wedding on the intermediate days, on Chol HaMoed? And the answer they come to is Lefi she'ein me'arvin simcha besimcha. Because one may not mix one joy with another joy. We can't mix two different types of joy. They each require their own celebration. And, one example is perhaps one example. One explanation is perhaps the rabbis were concerned that a person might focus too much on the wedding and ignore the festival, so they wouldn't observe the festival they needed to observe. A way of thinking about this is that the communal obligation to observe the festival is important, and we're afraid that people will focus too much on their individual obligation to celebrate at their weddings. But I sense that in addition to this communal versus individual values discussion, that the rabbis also knew what the Bengsons discovered, that we can hold joy and grief, and we can hold different kinds of joy at the same time. That our emotions are complicated and intertwined, and that there can be what Abigail Bengson calls a heaviness of joy. So the rabbis, knowing this, wanted to preserve a simple and uncomplicated kind of joy for our festivals. And I give them a lot of credit for intuiting these questions and for sensing these truths about the human experience, that we have complicated hearts and that we can feel joy and grief at once, and that we can feel two different types of joy at once. I've always found that even if my answers are different than the answers the rabbis come to, the questions are really the treasure. And the questions are often how I feel most connected to these ancient conversations. So the truth is, my answer is closer to the Bengsons. I would allow and even encourage us to practice holding joy and grief at the same time, because one does not necessarily diminish the other. On the contrary, holding both can bring each into relief as we allow ourselves to be more fully present in our humanness. And so I hope that when we say Chag Sameach this year, that we might be brave enough to challenge ourselves and intentionally to remind ourselves that even when joy is intertwined with grief or other emotions, the joy is still there. We get to keep it. Chag Sameach.